Hi, good evening and Namaskar. Can I request Raman sir to please switch off on your camera? Hi, Namaskar everyone. My name is Shakeel. I welcome you all on behalf of Mind Mingle to this webinar series that we are organizing, and this is the ninth week and the ninth episode of this webinar series on meaningful living, learning, and livelihood. Today's topic of this webinar is: Does tradition have a place and relevance in living and learning? And as you know, this series will be facilitated by Gopalan sir. And along with Gopalan sir, just a second. So as you know, along with Gopalan sir, there will be two panelists with us that you can see on the screen. And I will just give a brief introduction of the panelists and then we will start the webinar. So our first panelist is Mr. R.V. Raman, or we can call him RVR. So RVR describes himself as trying hard to look and feel I'm a cool and happy lucky guy. RVR is average regular Indian who has muddled through 55 years of his life trying to be happy while doing the least amount of work that he can to get the basic material things of life. A Tam Braham, Tamil Brahmin by birth, who thinks and talks in Hindi, an advertisement and marketing professional who has never smoked or had even a single drop of beer. He had he headed MNCs, but never worn like a tie in his life. And in the last 15 odd years, he has not done a full-time job, but has been able to climb the consulting ladder by now, being referred to as mentor and advisor. Being married to the same person who has tolerated him for 28 years, she has a company in their 21-year-old son who thinks that RVR does not know anything about everything. Welcome, RVR, to this panel. And our second speaker is panelist is Vedashree. Vedashree is a dancer, biologist, and overall an enthusiastic person. She's a 24-year-old graduate who is passionate about both performing arts and applied sciences and fed up of being asked to pick a lane. She started training in classical dance at the age of 6, which paired well with her flair of being dramatic and eventually led to exploration of the theater arts. On the other hand, being raised in Valley School for 12 years, surrounded by its colorful tropical ecosystem, also drew her to the study of life sciences. With a deep devotion of Gray's Anatomy and House MD, she made valiant attempts to medical entrance exam, but 6 years later, she is a self-satisfied holder of a BSc biology degree. Welcome, Vedashree. So we will start this session with a talk by Gopalan sir. He will speak for 15, maybe 10, 15 minutes, and then the panelists will join the dialogue. Over to you, Gopalan sir.
Thank you, Shakeel. So, namaste, everybody. The question for today is: does tradition have a place and relevance in living and learning? So, obviously, the first question to ask is: what do we mean by tradition? Now, if you consider the synonyms of tradition, they are classical, common, conventional, historic, long established. So, tradition itself is a word that derives from the Latin tradere, literally meaning to transmit, to hand over, to give for safekeeping. What is it that is handed over or given for safekeeping? Only something that is considered to be of value. Now, the value comes, does it not, from the unique discoveries, experiences, insights that people have. These discoveries, experiences, and insights cannot be replicated. They have to be actually experienced afresh every time by every person. They cannot be planned to be happened in a time frame that we want to. So is tradition invented to meet this limitation that you cannot replicate experiences or have experiences when you decide you will want to have them? Is it also an attempt to convey the end result of discoveries, experiences, insight, without the effort of having them. Somebody else has had the experience, he's got the fruit. Can others get the fruit directly? So with this background, let's look at some experiences, the different kinds of experiences, traditions that have come into our lives. I've categorized them as 4 kinds. The first is the inane and irrelevant traditions. Practically every school in Bangalore today, in the last 10 years, has something called a graduation day. Nobody knows why, but they all have a graduation day. There's a lot of fanfare, except this COVID times. Now, this is an import from the US. In the US, schools are not affiliated to any examination or any body. Every school gives its own certificate. So graduating students of every year are awarded that certificate, and that day is called graduation day. In our country, every school is affiliated, either state board or ICSE or CBSE. So the certificate is not really awarded by the school. It's awarded by these boards. What's the sense of having a graduation day? What's the meaning of it? Right? And in the same train follow Valentine's Day, Mother's Day, Father's Day. Today, Thanksgiving and Halloween have become traditions to celebrate. What relevance has that? Right? So that's that first category, inane and irrelevant traditions. The second kind of traditions are those that are born essentially out of fear. They may not be very old traditions. The tradition of wearing a mask is just a year old. But what drives that is fear and nothing else. Then there is the third kind of tradition. Somebody has had an understanding of matter, body, and connections between that. But people don't necessarily accept what they say. But they have found value in that. So they create a practice which becomes a tradition. There are many of these, particularly in our land. Let me take a few as examples. We have a custom of piercing the ears of children, boys and girls, and usually it's done by the first year. The understanding is that there are psychic channels in the body, and piercing the ear stimulates the psychic channels. Then there is the practice of drinking water from a copper pot, said to be very healthy practice. All over India, traditionally, people eat with their fingers, right? It's not considered unclean. It's considered healthy, in fact. Then you have a culture of rising early, before the sunrise. So these are traditions where somebody has felt the value of it, and they've laid down a practice so that others don't have to question, they can just follow. And then you have the fourth category of traditions. People have had an insight. They've had an insight into living and its different dimensions. And from that, they come up with some practices, they advocate practices which have become traditions. An example of this is saying a prayer of thanks before starting a meal. This is common to all religions all over the world. In Christianity, they call it saying grace. Hinduism, Islam, every religion has this practice of saying a prayer of thanks before you start your meal. Every religion across the world also advocates thinking or taking the Lord's name, right? So these are traditions which have come from certain insights of people. Now, if we are clear that discoveries, experiences, and insights cannot be handed down because they have to be experienced afresh, what is the use of studying these discoveries, insights, and experiences of others? The one use we can easily see is they can point a finger in the direction to take. So instead of completely groping in the dark, it makes the journey easier because somebody who has had an insight says, go this way, it's easier to find it. Isn't this why all knowledge is valuable? Because knowledge is a record of discoveries, experiences, and insights. So the question then really gets modified. Does knowledge have a place and relevance in living and learning? Now, obviously, knowledge has a place. We are not, I don't think anybody is suggesting that you should discard all knowledge and everybody start from the scratch every time. That would be daft, right? So why then does this question arise at all? We can see that knowledge is not to be discarded. Why does this question rise at all? If you look at the synonyms of tradition, conventional, historic, long established, they all imply following. Follow the path already established. Now, following means conformity, and conformity means no freedom. So, following a tradition implies no freedom for oneself. Now, everyone, every living being, in fact, values freedom. So, is this why this question arises whether tradition has a place and relevance? Because it comes in the way of freedom. You can't follow tradition and have freedom at the same time. So, the essence of tradition is unquestioned following. But if something is questioned and then a choice is made, is it following a tradition? So when a tradition is questioned, investigated, considered, and then a conscious decision is taken to do or not to do something, if the resultant action is the same as what has been prescribed by the tradition, is it a following of tradition simply because it's you've come to the same approach or practice? Now, with this comes another terminology which we need to understand, and that is this scientific versus unscientific, right? We have a practice of saying, but all this is unscientific. These traditions which have been followed, they're all unscientific. What is scientific? I think that is something that we need to really look at. The scientific process says observe, experiment, hypothesize, observe, experiment, hypothesize, and it's an unending cycle. So in that scientific approach, there is never a conclusion and there is never complete knowledge about anything. It's a fluid situation all the time. What happens when you touch something which is outside the framework that science can handle? Because science is based on intellect, and intellect has a framework. So is there another way to investigate which does not include the intellect? So given this background, let us just review the examples which I gave of the different kinds of tradition. If you question these traditions, obviously graduation day, Valentine's Day, you would just discard because they're inane, irrelevant. No need to discuss that. Wearing a mask comes out of fear. Why does the fear originate? Is something that needs to be asked. And if you question that fear, you may or may not wear a mask of your own choice. That becomes your decision. You're not following a tradition then. But when it comes to this third category, piercing the ears, are there energy channels in the body? Now, science says there's no scientific explanation for this. So what does it mean that it doesn't exist at all? And this is where I feel that somewhere giving over importance to what a group of people who call themselves scientists say becomes our limitation, because we follow only what they say, right? So I'm sorry, it's a little dark. Our power has gone. The generator will start very soon. Similarly, drinking water from a copper pot. Now in science, we know that there is something called solubility. And in solubility, we know that actually everything is soluble. Copper is also soluble. Very small quantities get into the water. Plastic is equally soluble. So when we drink water from a bottled plastic bottle, we're drinking some amount of plastic too. So is it unscientific to think that small quantities of copper are going in and they are healthy for you? Then you come to this practice of eating with the fingers. See, the primary objection to eating with the fingers is fingers may be dirty, they may have bacteria on it. And somewhere in our thinking, particularly in this modern thinking, we have associated illness with bacteria. We forget that the human being is composed 80-90% of bacteria. You can't live without bacteria. So is it bacteria that causes illness? We don't ask this question, because all the time the message coming to us from the scientific world is that bugs cause it, bacteria cause it, right? And then when you talk of rising early, again, the science will tell you there's no evidence that your brain is more alert in the early mornings. Why should you follow that? But across the world, again, there is an insight that the human being is not somebody who lives in isolation. He lives within the field of the sun and the moon. And the human brain wave also has its cycles. And in their discovery, the Indians, for example, said Brahma Muhurta, the early morning from 3 to 5, is the best time for serious mental work. And in the 15th century, there is a little nursery rhyme that was made in the West. It said, the cock crows in the morning to tell us to rise, and he that lies late will never be wise. So obviously, this insight has been there even then. But our modern response to that would be, well, in those days, they didn't have electricity. They had no nightlife. So they justified going to sleep with the sunset and rising with the dawn. Today we have internet. We stay awake up to 2 o'clock, right? Do we miss out this other side, that there is the brain function in a certain way at a certain time, and that insight is lost? Then you come to that last category of traditions, which are insights of seers. For example, saying a prayer before a meal or taking the name of the Lord. Why should you take the name of the Lord? Just a moment. I'm sorry, we are in the remote age. We have to go and change over ourselves. Right. So why should you take the name of the Lord? Right. I'll just digress with a little story just to relieve the tedium. Lord Vishnu is the highest level of the gods, and he has a great devotee in Narada who's always singing his praises. He doesn't think of anything else. So Narada considers himself to be Vishnu's greatest devotee, but he wants a validation of it. So once he goes across to Vishnu and says, who is your greatest devotee? And he expects to be told, you are. And instead Vishnu says, there's one farmer who stays in a village, in so and so village. He is my greatest devotee. So that gives Narada quite a shake, and he goes to see this farmer. And this fellow is an old man, large family, he's got perennial problems to address. He gets up in the morning, he says, Hari Om, and then he starts his work, goes to the field, works the whole day, does all his fighting and whatever he does through the day, comes back in the night, has his simple meal, then he says, Hari Om, and goes to bed. And Narada says, what? He says, takes the name of Hari twice, and he's the greatest devotee. I'm nothing. So he goes to Vishnu. Then Vishnu says, let me give you a task. He gives him a bowl filled to the brim with oil. Now he says, Narada, you have to do one job. You have to put this pot of oil on your head and take a walk around the city. Mind, not one drop must be spilled. So Narada very seriously and with complete attention keeps the bowl of oil on his head, and he walks very consciously, makes sure that not one drop of oil is spilled. And then he comes back and says, yes, Lord, job is done. So then Vishnu asks him, during this walk around the city, how many times did you think of me? And Narada says, how could I think of you? My complete attention was on that oil. Not one drop was to be spilled. And Vishnu says, that old man is immersed in his problems, but twice a day he thinks of me. So, why should you think of the Lord? Is really the question we need to ask. Is it a belief? We all have heard of Kabir's doha. Dukh mein sumiran sab kare, sukh mein kare na koi. Jo sukh mein sumiran kare, dukh kahe ko hoy. Right? So this is not just today. This is from very old. So does thinking of the Lord imply a belief that there is a God? Or is it just a reminder and a restatement of the insignificance of me and myself? Just a pointer. Look, you're a speck. Just a reminder of that. Just like when you look at the earth and you look at the Milky Way in the sky, you understand how small the earth is in this totality, but we make so much noise about it. So is the purpose of taking the name of the Lord just a reminder to oneself that I am not all that big? Do we need such reminders? So could the ancients have had insight into matters that we have no comprehension about? And could the origin of some of these traditions be from such insights? Can we discount such a possibility? So today, tradition and modernity are widely used as polar opposites in a linear theory of social change, right? That assumes that with progress and in time, man's wisdom increases. Therefore, modern man must be wiser than ancient man. This is an unquestioned assumption. But is this so? Does the lifestyle of modern man reflect a greater wisdom than ancient man? Now, this is also to some extent strengthened by misunderstanding of science and scientific approach on one hand, and also misunderstanding teachers like J. Krishnamurti, who we think have condemned tradition, right? So scientific approach, we've already talked about it. All powers of the mind are outside the realm of scientific approach. Until 100 years ago, they wouldn't even accept that such a thing as mind existed, right? So when it comes to powers of the mind, they wash their hands off and they say anything you talk about there is unscientific. So they can't talk about it. Now, Krishnamurti said, the word tradition means to carry over from the past generation to this generation, from time immemorial to carry over from father to son and so on. A certain custom, a certain idea, a certain concept. That tradition conditions the mind. Is it not blind for unquestioned following that conditions the mind? Or if you have adopted a practice out of your own discernment, would that condition the mind? So why is it that we do not attempt to see what caused a tradition to come up in the first place? And are there any gems at the bottom that are worth discovering? Obviously, the answer is simple. These gems are very deeply hidden. We don't know anybody who can explain it to us. That gem has to be discovered for oneself. And therefore, no two people will have the same discovery. Each one will come up with his own opinion. So 4 people will have 5 opinions about the same gem. Therefore, it's difficult to find out what is actually the gem and which is the garbage around. So my question then is it not valuable to keep questioning every practice of tradition? And if you say this has arisen from fear, discard it. If you think that it has a value because of some insight, then you decide for yourself whether you want to continue that practice, modify it in the same way, whichever way. Once you do that, are you following tradition or is it your own decision, right? So does meaningful living demand that we do not blindly discard every practice handed down simply because it is from the past? Instead, every practice be examined and everyone decide for himself what he will keep, what he will modify, what he will discard. In doing that, can that person also justify it for himself why he is doing that? Why is he discarding? Why is he modifying? Why is he keeping? Those statements will reveal the motive which is making him modify, discard, or keep, right? Now, seeing this motive is critical to understanding myself. And understanding myself, self-knowledge, is this not the key to meaningful living? This is my question.
Thank you, Gopalan sir. So the forum is open. RVM and Mr. Raman and Vedashree, you can share your perspective. Or in case you have any question or you want to argue, anything.
In the good old tradition of ladies first, Vedashree.
Thank you. So, in light of everything that Gopalan uncle has already said, what I actually have is a question, because I understand that, like, etymologically there's a certain significance to, like, traditions, and I mean, largely people understand it to be certain things. It's not even that people dwell on the meaning of tradition. They understand certain things itself to be traditions, like traditional wear or like traditional festivals. But when I was thinking about this question before this discussion, I seem to be able to identify, like, logically two components of tradition. One is the repetitive nature of it, and the other is the shared nature of it between, like, many people. And I mean, yeah, I guess at this point, tradition is understood as something that's passed on from generation to generation, historical, classical, something to be followed. But yeah, I understood it to be something that each person can define, or like each, like even say a group of friends can define that this is our weekly tradition. And it makes it easier for us to collectively, I don't know, be students or whatever it is, live together. So in that sense, yeah, my question was that, could it be a tradition even if it's something that you define for yourself, even if you question it and decide that it's convenient and say, okay, for the rest of my life, I'm going to go along with this and say that this is who I am as a person. I am a follower of such a pattern of existing. And it's because I have tried it and found comfort in it. Would it not be a tradition then? Is that what you're saying? Because, yeah.
Yeah. Once you decide that, are you a follower?
What if there are just many people who have done it before and you agree with it and now you're doing it? So why does it not make you a follower?
Are you doing it because it was prescribed, or are you doing it because you have seen the validity of this and you have opted for it? So then are you a follower?
See, I mean, I understand the difference that you're trying to point out, but why does that mean that one of them is not a tradition? You can willingly participate in a tradition, right?
That's what I'm saying. When you willingly participate, you are doing it not with the intention of following. Following implies a blind faith. Without blind faith, you can't follow. So if you have questioned and you have said, okay, there's some meaning in this, I don't completely understand, but I see that it doesn't do harm. So therefore, I choose to walk this path. Am I then following?
Why not is my question.
No.
I'm saying, like, I mean, okay, fine. I understand that you're trying to say following itself implies a non-cognizance of it. Yeah.
Right. So then actually I'm taking the responsibility And it's not that I have decided to do this for the rest of my life. This
Fair enough.
questioning will
Yeah.
happen every moment, every day. So it's not that I have decided I will go this way.
True. I mean, yeah, I just thought that tradition could be co-opted for something which you decidedly do over and over again, just because of the two components that I thought was like enough to define tradition.
See, even this component of doing it over and over again, it is my mind which says I'm doing it over and over again, right? Because I did it yesterday and I'm doing it now. Therefore, it's a repetition. But when I'm completely in it, do I have the memory that I have been doing this for the last 10 years?
Yes.
Or each time if the involvement is complete.
No, I mean, it's the comfort of knowing that you are doing something that you can predict the outcome of as well. Because, okay, no, when you do something for 10 years, it is in every visceral sense something that you've been doing for 10 years, which is different from something you started yesterday. I mean, yeah, you can fully be involved in it. It doesn't have to be tedious if that's what you're pointing out, but the conditioning exists. I mean, that's how memory works. That's not something you can eliminate from the process of being conscious.
So that is why I asked, can I be aware of that motive? Can I be aware of that conditioning operating even as I'm deciding? What you pointed out, that there is a certain comfort in following. So do I see that I'm actually seeking that comfort, and that is why I'm opting for it? If I've seen that, right, I may follow, I may modify, I may do different things. That's different. But can I only be aware that I'm seeking comfort? Therefore, I'm seeking a safety net all the time.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, fair enough.
Right?
So let me tell you a quick story before I share my point of view, whatever it is. The quick story is there was a king who had a beautiful daughter. And many people wanted to marry that beautiful princess. So like in good old Indian traditional style, the king said, we'll have a competition. And the competition was that anybody who wanted to marry had to line on one side of the river, jump in and go to the other side. And the guy who came first got the princess. And the catch was, there is always a catch. This river was full of crocodiles. So all these guys were standing. Nobody was ready to jump. And then chapak. One guy jumped and he swam, got to the other side, and everybody surrounded him. What a brave guy. You've got the beautiful princess. The guy said, forget all that shit. Tell me who pushed me into the river. The reason I'm telling you this story is this is exactly how I am feeling. I don't know how I got pushed into participating in this panel. and the answer is really what's important. I think Gopalan is my cousin and he's elder to me. It's part of tradition, at least in my family, to say yes to somebody who's elder to you.
Absolutely.
I said yes. And that's really where I connect with what Vedashree said. Is tradition is comfort. Tradition is, in a way, respecting something that others before you, and you believe they've done it for the right things. And tradition is also about a sense of belonging. To me, even if I'm not applying my own mind, like Gopalan said, comfort, belonging, and respect are big enough motives for a large set of people to follow tradition. And while we're talking about tradition, it strikes me that, and in the context of learning, that today we are at the cusp of, in the biggest sense, traditional learning being challenged because of the pandemic. What is traditional learning? I'm saying in the simplest way, it's classroom, teacher to student, face to face. And here you're talking about e-learning. That's the traditional way of being educated, of being taught, of learning. And something is forcing you today to relook at the very basic construct of learning, remote, virtual, uh, no personal contact. So what happens to tradition, and how does one really squarely address this challenge is something that I would be very interested to hear what somebody like Gopalan thinks about.
See, this is precisely the point I was trying to drive at, right? What you pointed out, what Vedashree also pointed out, that we all deep down look for a cocoon of safety, a cocoon of comfort, a cocoon of assurance, right? Why do we go into education and get degrees and diplomas? It goes with the thing that that certificate is going to get you a job, right? And the world has changed, and that certificate no more gets you a job, but we still hold on to that because the other, considering the alternative, is very unsettling. So we don't want to live with that uncertainty, right? So we are always seeking certainty in everything that we do, and this filters into every aspect of our living. Whereas if you look at core of these insights, the really worthwhile gems, they didn't come from a seeking of uncertainty. What they said is the only thing you can be certain is that every moment there will be change. This is what they said. From that, now we say, okay, there will always be change, but how do I bring some element of continuity in my life? Because for us, continuity is very important. We never question why we are so uncomfortable with change. And that's why we resist change. So when you talked of the dilemma in education, you can actually see that what is happening in the name of education is irrelevant. We are holding on to it. Everybody has a vested interest, from the people who built the school to the teachers who teach there. The vested interest is I have to change. And do I need to? I mean, I have a few more years to go. Do I need to take the trouble of changing? Can I manage without changing? Right? Whereas actually life is saying every minute change, be alive moment to moment. And we don't want to get on with that uncertainty. So we give tradition as an excuse for that. I'm asking, at least for the thinking person, can he afford to take such an attitude? Or he has to say, look, I have an intellect, I have all this, I need to question, and inquiry is the only way to go.
But most of the time, what we all see, uh, that parents and the society plays a very important role. A child is of course born free, and he wants to explore everything. He wants to touch everything. He wants to eat everything, and that's how it explores the world, and does not follow any kind of tradition. But the parents who tell the child that you are born in this family and we follow this religion, you have to bow down to this god, and now while doing it, child may not feel good about it, or it may not satisfy the child, and the child grows with that pressure. But at the same time, the child also knows, if I don't do it, if I stop doing it, my parents sentiments are going to get hurt, and at the same time he wants to make them happy. So even if he stops, then parents will be unhappy, and then eventually the child will be unhappy. So he continues doing it. Or other people, those who actually get into and stuck into this kind of trap where they can't ask questions, because another tradition is, as Mr. Raman said, that you have to obey your elders. So 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 you have to do that. You can't question. So if you ask questions, they don't have answers, and they won't give you answers. So isn't it? I see it as a like very dangerous trap where you can't ask questions, you can't get answers, and then you have to respect everybody, and then you have to follow. How to really get out of this? Because there is so much pressure.
So it's not only the responsibility of the student, it's more the responsibility of the parent to be questioning himself, right? Which means that he needs to facilitate the child questioning him about things that he is very uncomfortable being questioned. So unless the parent is open for that, how is he going to bring about a different sense of responsibility in the child? So that is why it begins with oneself. It's not really what society is, what's the custom, what's around. Do I allow that kind of questioning in any relationship that I have with anybody? Right? I mean, if I'm the CEO, would I accept somebody at a very junior level coming and asking me, why did you decide this? Very, very few people allow it. There are a few. There are a few, but generally, this hierarchy, this is how the hierarchy comes in.
Yeah.
Through proper channel, we call it in the government terminology. You want to suggest something, you put a paper at bottom level. If it comes up to the top, we'll see. Right? So all these hierarchies that work, aren't they a very deep embedded, that same thing of caste? We may say that we don't have caste system today. In our minds, we have the caste system very much. The hierarchy. I know more than you. I am better qualified than you. But we never ask, what is the basis of that assumption?
Mr. Narayanan on YouTube asking a question. Is not tradition just facilitating a situation for a possible discovery?
So again, when you say facilitating a decision, you already are not looking at the process. You're looking at the end that you want to achieve. You see, we are never comfortable remaining with a process. It may produce a result that we want. It may not produce a result that we want. And we are so oriented towards the targets and fruits. What's the benefit of this? I mean, after doing all this, if I'm not going to get it, then what was the point of doing this activity at all? Therefore, we are not in the present then. We are in an imaginary situation where we're only projecting targets. Right? And that's why again and again the question keeps coming, but without targets, will there be progress at all of the human being? Has human being progressed these 50,000 years? See, again, we assume that we are in 21st century, we have all our technology, therefore we have progressed as compared to primitive man. We never question in what way have we progressed. Yes, we may have technology which is improved, but qualitatively living in terms of relationship, in terms of happiness, in terms of all that, have we progressed? We are afraid to question that for ourselves because we know what the answer will be.
So when you were speaking and sharing your perspective, you suggested that we should not discard any tradition just like that, thinking that it has come from past.
Yeah.
But that past was the present at one time, right? So there was no tradition before that, and people were discovering, and then they found some ways of doing things in a certain way, and they thought that this is the right way, and they continued. So why not today, as myself, I should discard everything and then begin the journey from here and see if I do it right and do it wrong, and then see without looking back at what they have been doing.
Right.
That can be another way, I believe.
Yeah. So are you prepared to discard all the knowledge that man has accumulated till now and say, I will begin again?
Yeah, that's not possible.
Even if it's not possible, it's not sensible, right? So we come into another question which we'll have to discuss another day, right? What is wisdom? It's not the accumulation of whatever man has discovered, but at the same time, it is not rediscovering from scratch everything. Then you in a lifetime you can never do it, right? So what is knowledge? What is wisdom? And how do you balance these two to be continually in a state of discovery?
Can I respond?
Yeah, please.
So I think it's like the fallacy of an extreme to say that everything is constantly changing and is constantly unpredictable. I mean, 100% change is not something you can prevent or eliminate altogether, but there are relative uh, degrees of predictability, and as civilization progresses, that itself is what we're trying to increase, right? And from the time that we started doing agriculture and everything, we're trying to make life something that is like you said, trying to take a shortcut to the best possible way to live. But what I don't agree with is saying that we shouldn't even try to make things predictable and change is something inevitable. So we should constantly be in a state of like chaos, which is, I mean, that in itself can be a negative reinforcement, right? Sometimes we are trying to look for comfort. And the thing is, when it comes to traditions, right, whether it's something that's passed on through your family or through your teachers, if it's something that is forced beyond your understanding, it's something that you want to escape. That's very natural. But I think even to like grow out of something, you need to make it predictable enough for you to seek out more things and be curious and look for more complex things to make predictable for yourself. Right? I mean, like even science as a journey is about not like, you keep trying to find more things that you can reliably say, yeah, I know this now, even to like whatever degree of relativity. So even if you are trying to cope with like the forever existing nature of change, it should come from a place of genuine, like satisfaction with what you know and curiosity to achieve more, rather than never being able to find any kind of balance and saying, no, this is how it's going to be. I shouldn't even try to find something like reliable because it's all a scam or whatever.
No. So, exactly. Do we ever ask at any point in our lives, what is it that I would love to do? Not whether it will provide me livelihood, whether it will do this, it will do that. What is it that I'd love to do? And because we don't ask it, do we ever give the opportunity to the youngster to ask, what is it you would love to do? Right? So we keep trying to fit them into these patterns where the end is predictable. 10 plus 2 plus 3, then after that university, so that then you get a job, then you can get married, you can have children, become grandchildren. Everything is predictable. Why do we we can only predict at that level, at the outer. But is it the outer which drives, or is it something inside which drives? Why do we all get frustrated with what we are doing and saying, what's the meaning of what I'm doing? At some point or the other, we ask this question. And the few who have been able to really find something that they love to do, who have that passion, they don't seem to have that problem. Right? So, is it important to find that fire in your life?
Absolutely.
And at what age will you find it? You see, if you come to the age of 70 and then say, everything that I did until now was a mistake, I should have done this, there's no point. The body has already gone to a point where you can't do it. So if you want to find that fire, you have to find that fire when you're young. That's when you can build on that fire. Right? How do you help somebody find that fire when you're young? If you, the teacher or the adult, the parent, is all the time saying, no, but you may fall, better to have the safety net. If all the time you're trying to do that, how do you help him find the fire?
So all the time is the problem, no? There should be some degree of predictability and some degree of you can go ahead and explore the rest.
That's right. How do you find that balance? Because this search for predictability doesn't confine itself to a limit. It's never ending.
I don't know. I'd like to think this. Sorry, continue.
No, but in this context of what we are speaking, see, the moment you say question a tradition, it's a contradiction in terms. When you question, so it's just tags we are using as names. If a parent tells a child to do something, forget the word tradition, and the child questions it due to circumstance, environment, culture, it's a new thought by itself. It's tradition, by definition, at least in my books, is following without questioning.
Yeah.
So if you're not following without questioning, you're basically saying tradition has no value. And that could be a point of view. But to say question tradition and then adopt it is not tradition.
Exactly what I'm trying to say. So if I want this child to rise early, and there is a value to rising early, am I doing it? If I am doing it, I don't have to tell him to rise early. He'll be watching. That will be the routine of the house. He'll watch me it happening all the time. See, in one sense, if you look at 50, 60, 70 years ago, right, the adults rose early. That was the practice. And 6 o'clock in the morning, they would put on this All India radio. That was the only thing you had. And you had devotional music. So whether you liked it or not, there was no way you could sleep up to 8 o'clock. Right? 6 o'clock, that music woke you up. So you were up. Right? In that sense, that is how the tradition of the drum beating in the temple started at 4 o'clock in the morning. It is a way of getting you to wake up. So when you are living something, are you then following a tradition? It comes back again and again and again to that. You see, how you live your life, in that living, you are conveying a message. You don't have to say this is a good practice. But there always has to be that option for a dialogue where somebody can ask, why do you rise early? I mean, I want to sleep late. And then there can be a dialogue that what happens, why do you rise early? Do I ask myself that? Right? So what has the sun rising got to do with the way my mind works? Is there a connect? To keep asking these questions for which nobody can give you answers. You have to come upon those answers yourself. And you come to different dimensions of that answer in different stages of your life.
So to link it to something else, but possibly, and that's what Vedashree was touching upon. This interplay between culture and tradition is also interesting. So it's part of your cultural fabric to follow some festivals. But the tradition of following a particular festival changes from household to household.
Yes.
Right?
Right.
So if then I'm saying, if at all this is a parallel or link, is it then that we are saying that the cultural context can be the predictable, the continuum, whereas the traditions can repeatedly be thought of and questioned, because the safety net, the fabric, is really the cultural festivals in the social context. But you question the traditions, whether you should bathe at 4 o'clock in the morning for Diwali or no, you can question. But to celebrate Diwali is something that you, in a way, sort of accept for a multiple set of positive reasons.
True. So the cultural thing is important, but then you see, we selectively take from that culture. We say, we will celebrate Deepavali, but this having a bath at 4 in the morning, no, that we don't want to do. I love to eat sweets, but the effort of making the sweets is too painful. I have the money. Why don't I just buy it from outside? See, that is picking and choosing without understanding what the whole thing is about, right? So this is what I meant by inquiry. Why do you have a festival? People need to come together. You need to have time together, right? And there's participation in it, right? Can you just package it into keeping just the day and then saying, okay, now we get sweets from here. We'll have a high tea at this time. We'll have a dinner at this time and say we have celebrated the festival, right? So we are not celebrating the way it was prescribed. It's something that you reinvent every time in the context of where you are, is it not? Yes, Naveen, you want to add something?
Nothing is specific, sir.
I just had an answer. I'm so sorry, were you going to say something?
Go ahead.
Sir, there is one question on YouTube. Rupaji has asked, why is chaos a bad thing?
Yes, Veda, would you like to respond to that? Why is chaos a bad thing?
No, I wouldn't say that it's a bad thing, but I was just pointing out the fallacy of assuming anything exists in extreme. To say that everything is chaos or that everything is predictable would be equally fallacious. Yeah.
True. But can we observe how our minds resist unpredictability, uncertainty. We call it chaos.
Mm.
We want everything to be predictable. I should know what the weather is like tomorrow morning.
But I mean, I think boredom as a phenomenon also exists, right? Like there is some thrill-seeking, chaos-seeking instinct also that we have.
That raises a different question. Where does boredom arise? If you have that fire and you love what you're doing, do you have a problem of boredom?
But then also you don't get stuck in like predictability. If you have that fire, you tend to look for new things. Yeah.
So this is just what I'm saying. So if you have the fire, there is no problem with any of these things. So when you don't have the fire, then come all these discussions about tradition and following predictability. Right?
Yeah. So we have anthropologically circled back to find the fire.
If you can't find a fire in your life, then I think we have lost an opportunity.
Mm.
Right? That comes first. Everything else follows. So what's the point of having all that follows without having that fire? So would you like to have the last word, my friend, about fire? Because he's a non-conformist. This fellow, right? As I told you, CEO never wore a tie, right? Never bothered about a job, right? Complete non-conformist. So I'm really asking you, you haven't gone this beaten route which others go, IIT, this, all that. So having done that, what would you say?
See, there was a line used by a brand in advertising, which I forget the brand. It said, "Tradition is what it used to be." Uh, I thought that summed up brilliantly what we are talking here. So I believe that tradition is very important for the reasons that I and Veda also touched upon, the comfort. But I completely agree with what Gopalan said about whether actively or through just your genes, the way you are built, or some factor. Some of us will question that actively or in subtler ways, and when that questioning happens, you will make your own choices. There it just becomes, you don't put this tag at that point in time that you have inquired, you have gone against tradition, you have been a non-conformist, you have been a rebel. You don't put these tags. uh, and then when white hair appears, and you when you're bored and having chai and you reflect, you possibly realize that that's what you did. So this journey, I think, for a lot of people is not necessarily an active journey, but the point is extremely well made and taken, that to question and figure out the fire is the starting point to anything and everything that follows. I think you put it beautifully and in very, very clear terms. I agree with that completely.
If we all start questioning, will the tradition of questioning be called a tradition? Yeah, can that be a tradition? Are you able to hear me?
Yeah, we are not saying tradition because that's the format we adopt. Question because you never accept anything just because somebody else has said it. Yes, he is elder. I respect what he says. He has more years of experience. He is saying this from his experience, but I am also seeing that he has got his own limitations, his conditioning. So I see all that, but the decision I take is mine, and I am responsible for that decision. Nobody else is. Right? So if I am taking the responsibility for every moment of my life, then where's the problem?
Yeah, that's true. Any final remarks? It's already 7.
I have none. Anybody else like to?
No.
Thank you very much, Gopalan sir. Thank you,
Thank
Raman
you.
ji and Vedashree ji. And thank you everyone
Thank
watching
you.
us on YouTube. And the
Good
video
night.
will stay there. And in case you wanna like watch it again, it's gonna be there. So you can watch it. And in case you wanna share it with somebody else, so you can again click the copy the link and share it with people you want them to watch. Thank you very much. We'll see you again next week at the same time.
Thank you. Good night.